Hey everybody, so today I'm going to show you how cleaning a skull can be as easy as digging a hole. So this is what we call the burying method, and it simply involves digging a hole, putting a raw skull down the hole, and letting the bacteria and bugs and whatnot clean the skull for you. Step number one, which is imperative, is to have a skull that is free of the hide. Fortunately, I get these from a butcher shop that come already skinned, but if yours is not skinned, you're going to want to skin it out first. The skin and the hide just does not decompose as fast as the tissue will, so that's going to hold you back. Now you'll notice I'm in the woods, and that's for a reason. Underneath the shade is going to keep the ground more moist, which is going to help the bacteria grow. If you let it sit out and dry out, it's going to take a whole lot longer. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple different ways to go about this, and then kind of the pros and cons to each of them. First one being sand. So just regular play sand, or the kind of sand you put under pavers is fine. You're going to want to dig a hole that's about 4 inches below and above the skull. So a little bit of space above it, a little bit of space below it. And that's going to create drainage, which is kind of the key as far as working with the sand goes. But the other thing, which is key, is you're going to want some type of screen to go on top. You know, a coon's going to come along, it's going to smell that, it's going to dig it up, carry your skull away, and then you're screwed. So you're going to put a screen on top, something that'll let rain and stuff get through, but won't let the animals get to your skull. Now, I like to put the skull in there facing up for two reasons. First off, like this is a sheep, and those bottom teeth will fall out like when you're digging it up, and they can be really easy to lose. So if you stand it up like that, teeth are facing up, that way when you pull it back out, they're less likely to fall out. And the top of the skull, which is the most visible part, will get less staining because it's sitting on top. All the gook and rotten stuff's gonna start settling to the bottom, and that bottom jaw is going to be in that mostly, so it'll create less staining in the end. Okay guys, time to dig these bad boys up. Alright, now that's just dug it out. We're going to wash it down, get all the extra rotten tissue off there. Okay, so the third skull, which you haven't seen up to this point in the video, is a whitetail doe deer skull that I buried right into the ground, just in the Virginia red clay. Buried it, took 5 months. Started in January to May, dug it up in May, and as you can see here, quite a bit of staining, but we're going to clean it up here quick with hydrogen peroxide. And this one was buried in sawdust, just oak wood sawdust, and this one is the one we buried in the sand. Now obviously you can tell there's a big difference in staining between the first two and the one that we buried in sand. A little bit of staining. The one buried in sand does have a little more corpse wax, but we can get that off here in a bit. So the next question is, how is it going to whiten? We're going to do a hydrogen peroxide bath for all three of them and see how they turn out. Okay, so I got them all cleaned up. I did a little bit of degreasing and a peroxide bath. I'm gonna hold the skulls up against the background here. Hopefully you can get a better look at exactly how they turned out. The first skull we have is the one that I buried in the sand. And then the second skull is the one that we buried in the sawdust. And lastly is the skull that I buried just in the dirt. Okay guys, so I wanted to go over a few things really quickly about the whole burying method to clean a skull. The two that I buried, the one in the sand and the one in the sawdust, middle of summertime, and it took 2 months, okay? So that's kind of your best case scenario. The deer skull, which I just buried in the dirt, that took about 5 months, and that was, I think I buried it in like January, and then January to May is about how long that took. So obviously cooler weather, it's going to take a whole lot longer to do. So just leave it in there, you know, more than enough time just to make sure everything gets broken down. I did put water on top of the ground. So whenever it was dry outside, hadn't rained in a few days, I threw a bucket of water over the ground. That's just going to help that bacteria stay alive and do its job. But I wanted to say a couple pros and cons about this whole method. So the pros is it's easy. You just dig a hole, you put a skull in there and leave it, okay? So that's kind of one of the major things to me. You're not using beetles, you're not boiling, you're not macerating. It's just stick it in the ground, you're done with it, okay? It does a good job. So as you saw, as long as you do it correctly, the turbinates and teeth and stuff like that, they stay perfectly fine, okay? So it does a good job, that's a pro. And then another pro that's really good is that it doesn't smell, or at least it doesn't smell that much. So the one that I buried in the ground and the one that I buried in the sand, just a very slight smell. If you were to go around that area, you can smell a little bit. The cool thing though about the one that I buried in the sawdust, like literally no smell at all. So when I dug that thing up, I smelt it. I mean, no trace, absolutely no trace of a foul smell. It just smelled like sawdust. So that was really cool. So this is a viable method. Now, is it the best method to use for cleaning skulls? I don't think so. I think macerating skulls is the best. You can check out the previous video that I did on that. But it is, again, it's easy, it's hassle-free. So it has its pros and it has its cons. The cons, okay, really quickly. Staining. So you saw some of the staining that happens when you bury them. The one I did just in the dirt, you know, had some staining on it. Possibly losing the teeth and some of the small bones. If you don't dig it up correctly, the teeth can fall out. You saw when I took that skull out of the ground, I took the teeth out and put them aside. So what I do is, as soon as I pull that skull out, I collect the teeth and I process them separately. That way you don't risk losing them. Let's see, possibly forgetting where the skull is if you don't mark it correctly. That's a con. Possibly animals digging it up. And it takes, it can take possibly a long time to clean the skull. So that is a con. But you can weigh out the pros and cons yourself. So anyhow, don't take my word for it. You can go try yourself. But I hope you learned a little something in this video. If you have any more questions or want to tell me how you do your skulls, it's perfectly fine. Just leave a message below. Alright guys, thank you. Alright guys, thanks for sticking around and watching. Again, I hope you learned a little bit of something. Just wanted to say thank you to a few people who commented on my videos this past few weeks. Castro Sama, or Sama, The Outdoor Channel, Legendary Skulls, Alex Hanley, and Rich French. They all left some comments below, so I appreciate that. It's good getting to know you guys. And then I wanted to say thank you to Jackie Parrish. She left a review on my Facebook page. I'll leave a link down below to my Facebook page. And she said, "Thank you for all the help and creative ideas. Information you include makes starting my own project much simpler. Look forward to your next video. Cool. Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate you leaving that review. And Jackie actually is a skull carver herself, so she does some pretty cool work. So I really appreciate that coming from another skull carver. Anyhow, guys, thank you for watching, and please consider subscribing if you feel you've learned something. And you can check me out on Instagram and Facebook, obviously. Yeah. All right, guys, take it easy.